Kuminjinka. Welcome from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne, Australia. We pay our respects to the traditional owners of this land and their elders emerging past, present, and future. Prinhamda, good afternoon. My name is Reverend Sarah Villarreal Bishop, and one caveat before I begin this presentation, I should let you know that I am obviously not Australian, nor am I Welsh. However, got an interesting story to tell about things that I am learning from the Welsh church women. I was born and raised in Wisconsin as a Lutheran, and then it got complicated. My Facebook profile might sum it up best. I'm an expatriate anthrozoologist. I'm a pastor, former lion and tiger keeper, accidental diplomat, wife, and mom. I am both international and ecumenical. I've lived in Europe and the former Soviet Union, and now here down in Australia. Most of my training has been with the Church of England in Europe, although I was ordained by the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. And I have worked for and am currently vicar to the Archbishop for the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Estonia. I'm now called to the Melbourne Welsh Church. I just began in January, and then the world turned on its head. They self-identify as Presbyterian. So we have a Presbyterian minister, a Lutheran minister, and a Free Church minister. We advocate for underrepresented voices, including women, children, racial and cultural minorities, and above all, God's creation. So for me, being ecumenical and international is just another step in my global journey as I minister wherever I am called. And now I'm in Melbourne, Australia. And one of the things that has been very interesting is that the Melbourne Welsh Church is a community of nonconformist Methodist Welsh, and they have hospitality and caring at a variety of levels. This is epitomized by the women of the Melbourne Welsh Church. They have a long history of simply being in a way that is caring and compassionate in community, both their own community within the church and the community of the surrounding area of Melbourne. The history and the current events lift this getting things done attitude, overt or covert, quietly or with fanfare. They have preached from the pulpit, they have gone to war, they've become doctors and provided care for women and infants at little to no cost. They've created a teaching hospital and lodging, ladies' auxiliaries, and preparing tea. And I am going to briefly touch on some of the ways that we can learn to be church by looking at the women of the Melbourne Welsh Church. There's a very important side story that comes here. A lot of the time, while I have been many places, I have not belonged particularly in any of them. And this gives me some external insight to the way that the women of the Melbourne Welsh Church are profoundly powerful women. A very small insight into my journey is that when I arrived in Australia, traveling from Estonia, I discovered to my profound shock that the Lutheran Church of Australia and New Zealand does not ordain women. Unlike people who have grown up with this knowledge, I had 50 years of the opposite understanding. And in the same way that no one questions their suitability to vote, and suddenly finding yourself denied that opportunity, it was earth-shattering. I had, in fact, pursued the call and the training necessary for ordination and succeeded in spite of the geographical challenges. We arrived 1 month before the vote with the LCA, and they once again chose not to support the ordination of women. I would not be allowed to work in my chosen field. And this, in addition to several other things, sent me into profound depression. We searched for nearly 10 months to find a church where we could worship as a family and be welcomed for who we are. And we went to many churches. On a whim, we walked into the Welsh church one morning, and we haven't left since. And in spite of the challenge of learning a little bit of Welsh and the denominational differences and the distance it is from our home, it is one of the most open and affirming places I have ever experienced. That is the power of divine hospitality. It brings you into a welcoming place from great distances, cultural gaps, and language barriers. So let us go back to Victorian times as I try to illustrate why the women of the Welsh Church are a powerful force of nature and what we can learn from them about being church. I have 3 examples of being church. One is a bold example, a powerful and history-changing woman. Then there's a series of those that are much more subtle, but equally overtly visible and very, very much elements of change. And finally, there are the quiet and covert actions of everyday women that create the atmosphere that is an engine for change. Our overtly powerful and history-changing woman is Dr. Emma Constance Stone. I chuckle when I read things like In the History of the Melbourne Welsh Church by Bill Jones, where he writes, "The Reverend Dr. David Ergin Jones, in 1896, with the elder's blessing, was instrumental in enabling his wife to establish in rooms in the church medical facilities that for the first time in the city were provided by women for women." However, it should be noted that Constance was pursuing medicine as a career by the early 1800s and did not marry the Reverend Doctor until 1893. And in 1895, she was instrumental in establishing the Victoria Medical Women's Society. At a meeting held on the 5th of September 1896, 11 women doctors decided to set up a hospital of their own. Their vision and its subsequent achievement was attributed by the others to Constance's inspired leadership. The literature states that the elders' approval for the use of St. David's Hall was not controversial. But listening to tours given at the church, it is repeated that the Reverend Doctor quietly stated to the elders that permission would be given or he would need to depart. His use of his power and privilege went a very long way in this instance. And internally, with a chuckle, comments are made that perhaps Constance applied pressure on her own husband, gently or not so gently, until he was able to lean on the elders. And eyes crinkling and quiet laughter, heads nod in agreement. No matter what the literature says, since it's mostly been written by men, the ladies tell me, there are many stories behind the fortitude and the vision of Dr. Constance Stone. In the Nonconformist Methodist Welsh connection, the role of the moderator has similarities to the bishop of a synod or a diocese, in which multiple churches, each with their own board of elders, come together to discuss business, questions of theology, and best practices. The leader of the elders is called the secretary. So the hierarchy is elders, secretary, and then moderators. The moderator is both an administrator and a leader, and the chair of the larger board. And they are also a spiritual and administrative head of the connection, but they are not an autocrat. This is very much leading from the pews. Miss Sybil Llewellyn of Caramel Welsh Church was a moderator of the overall Welsh connection in 1932. There is nothing in the records that I could find and read in English that would say anything other than the fact that she was elected. Australia was in the midst of a Great Depression. Unemployment was at a high of 32% at this time, and this resulted in riots in Melbourne and Sydney. But Miss Llewellyn is a mystery. She would remain the only female name, and a single female at that, on the list of moderators until 1964, in which Mrs. Blodwin E. Smith of Williamstown joins her on that list. 30 years later, one of our own ladies, Mrs. Christine Boomsma, became the first woman to serve as an elder on the board. This was in 1992, and this just highlights how the two female moderators before her, one step higher than an elder or a secretary, were so unusual. The next female moderator followed in 1997, Mrs. Wendy A. Arnold from the Sebastopol Welsh Church. And I personally hold the unusual honor of being the first female ordained minister in the Welsh Church Connection, 168 years after its beginnings. These are very visible roles, and roles with some level of power, both when it was a body of 24 churches and now in its very small two-church, nonconformist Welsh Methodist Connection. These created relationships are where divine hospitality comes in. It's a lesson I'm learning to balance. The created relationship is not about me and you, but about us, about the space that is created when we come together. Our women are so much more than the planners and the cooks and the servers and the cleaners. They are the breath of life in this church. They don't practice hospitality or have a committee for it. They live it. They don't even know that they're doing it sometimes. But when you come to this church, you are welcomed with genuine curiosity. You are talked to respectfully with the heart and the hands, helping you in every way that they can, without even particularly realizing they do it, because it has so much become a part of who they are. They know that to get things done, relationship is key. And so they do what needs to be done in order to forward those relationships. I definitely do not want to shortchange the gentlemen of the church, and we do have a couple gentlemen. The women, however, are the reason that I am thinking about how hospitality becomes a part of who we are. How the open and welcoming, whether you are an ebullient, outgoing person or a quiet, introverted person, is part of what creates the atmosphere. The men themselves are very supportive of this, and in some ways I think that the women help them see that. We have both Welsh men and Welsh women, as well as those that are married to Australians or others. And as a result, we have a melting pot, an ecumenical, international, welcoming space that is teaching me a lot about divine hospitality and the way that we come together and how we become who we are because of who we are in relationship. From 1896, when Constance Stone called the first meeting of the Victorian Medical Women's Society, to the resulting Queen Victoria Hospital. From the 1920s, when the first female moderator of the Welsh Calvinistic Connection in Victoria, onwards to the installation of the first female minister of the Melbourne Welsh Church in 2020. The women of the Welsh Church continually find a way, across time and across space, to get things done. If the culture of the time does not allow for the women to have certain roles, but that role is necessary, they will do it. If the culture needs to change, they will change it. If they need to call someone from outside their denomination and well outside their comfort zone, they will do so. We have a lot to learn from the women of the Welsh Church. We can learn about relationship, we can learn about hospitality, and we can learn about welcome. But a lot of times, one of the things we are learning is how to get things done. I appreciate that this was an entirely too brief and very large overview, instead of getting to dig into the various topics in various ways, where I could have explored hospitality from the other angles and how this is relevant to us as Christians and as women. However, I hope you enjoyed the overview, the bird's eye view, as it were, of being church, learnings from the Welsh Church women. Thank you.